They thought Maya Chen was the perfect victim when they cornered her in the art room and forced her to her knees on the paint-splattered floor. Chloe Patterson and her crew had no idea that the quiet girl who spent lunch periods alone sketching in notebooks had been perfecting throws and holds since she could walk. What happened next didn't just send the bullies screaming from the classroom. It shattered every assumption Westfield Middle School had about strength, silence, and what happens when someone finally decides they've had enough. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The October morning mist clung to the red brick facade of Westfield Middle School like a damp blanket, filtering the Connecticut sunlight through windows that had witnessed decades of adolescent drama. Located in the heart of Brookhaven, a town that prided itself on excellent test scores and pristine soccer fields, the school served as the social laboratory where 13 and 14-year-olds learned the unforgiving mathematics of popularity. The hallways buzzed with the particular energy that marked the 6th week of 8th grade, when summer friendships had either solidified into lasting alliances or crumbled under the weight of new social pressures. Westfield's corridors were lined with championship banners and academic achievement awards, testament to a community that valued success above all else. The lockers gleamed with fresh paint, and the floors bore the kind of institutional shine that spoke of generous budgets and involved parent committees. Yet beneath this polished surface, the same ancient hierarchies that governed middle schools everywhere had taken root and flourished. Popular students moved through the halls with the confidence of those who had never questioned their place in the world, while others navigated carefully, hoping to avoid attention that might prove unwelcome. The cafeteria served as the epicenter of these social dynamics, its round tables creating natural boundaries between different groups. Athletes clustered near the windows overlooking the practice fields, theater kids gathered around tables covered with script pages and costume sketches, and honor students formed study circles that barely paused their academic discussions long enough to eat. Between these established territories lay invisible pathways that most students learned to navigate without conscious thought, understanding instinctively which areas were safe and which were best avoided. Chloe Patterson ruled this landscape with the kind of effortless authority that came from having never been denied anything she wanted. At 14, she possessed the combination of early physical development, designer wardrobe, and family wealth that made her opinions matter to classmates who barely knew why they sought her approval. Her father owned the largest commercial real estate firm in Brookhaven, and her mother sat on the school board, ensuring that the Patterson name carried weight in both student and adult circles. Chloe had learned early that influence could be wielded like a weapon, and she had spent 2 years refining her ability to elevate or destroy reputations with calculated precision. Ashley Rodriguez served as Chloe's primary lieutenant, a tall girl whose nervous energy manifested in constantly checking her phone and adjusting her perfectly straightened hair. Ashley's family had moved to Brookhaven from Hartford when her father's accounting firm landed a major contract, and she had quickly learned that proximity to Chloe offered protection from the kind of social exile that befell those who didn't fit neatly into established categories. Her eagerness to please made her particularly ruthless when given direction, as if proving her loyalty required her to exceed even Chloe's expectations for cruelty. Madison Wells completed their trio, a shorter girl with an infectious laugh that could turn sharp as broken glass when directed at the wrong target. Madison's parents were both doctors at Valley Regional Hospital, and their demanding schedules had left her largely unsupervised since elementary school. She had discovered that making others feel small was an effective way to feel important herself, and she brought to the group a creativity in identifying weaknesses that made her invaluable to Chloe's operations. Together, they had perfected a system of social control that operated just below the radar of adult supervision. They understood that modern schools had policies against obvious bullying, so they specialized in exclusion, humiliation disguised as jokes, and the kind of psychological warfare that left no physical evidence. Their targets were carefully chosen, students who were unlikely to fight back, whose families lacked the social connections to make effective complaints, who could be isolated from potential allies through careful manipulation of group dynamics. The faculty at Westfield Middle School prided themselves on maintaining a positive environment, but like educators everywhere, they struggled with the gap between official policies and social realities. Most teachers focused on their curriculum and classroom management, trusting that the guidance counselors and administrators would handle broader behavioral issues. The result was a system where sophisticated social aggression could flourish as long as it avoided crossing the most obvious lines that would trigger formal intervention. Mrs. Rebecca Davis represented the best of Westfield's teaching staff, bringing 15 years of experience and genuine care for her students to her role as 8th grade art teacher. Her classroom in the east wing of the building had become a refuge for students who felt out of place elsewhere, its walls covered with student artwork that celebrated creativity over conformity. Mrs. Davis had developed a keen eye for recognizing when students were struggling with issues beyond academic challenges. But even she found it difficult to address problems that operated in the shadows of school policy. The art room itself reflected Mrs. Davis's philosophy about education and creativity. Large windows filled the space with natural light, and workstations were arranged to encourage both individual expression and collaborative projects. Supplies were abundant and well-organized, reflecting the community's investment in arts education, and the atmosphere was deliberately informal to encourage risk-taking and experimentation. For many students, the hour they spent in art class represented the most relaxed and authentic part of their school day. This was the world that Maya Chen navigated each morning as she walked through Westfield's front doors, her backpack heavy with textbooks and art supplies, her expression carefully neutral as she made her way to her locker. She had learned to move through the hallways like water, flowing around obstacles and avoiding anything that might create turbulence in the social ecosystem she observed, but had never quite managed to join. Maya Chen moved through the crowded hallways of Westfield Middle School with the fluid grace of someone who had learned to occupy space without claiming it. At 13, she possessed the kind of quiet presence that allowed her to observe without being observed, to listen without drawing attention to herself, and to navigate the complex social terrain of 8th grade as if she were walking through a minefield where the wrong step could trigger explosions she was not prepared to handle. Her black hair fell in a straight curtain to her shoulders, often serving as a partial shield when she bent over her sketchbook during lunch, and her dark eyes held an alertness that most of her classmates interpreted as shyness, rather than the careful awareness it actually represented. The Chen family had moved to Brookhaven 3 months earlier when Maya's mother, Linda, accepted a nursing position at Valley Regional Hospital. The transition from their previous home in San Francisco had been difficult for Maya, who had left behind not just friends and familiar places, but an entire support system that had understood and valued the quiet intensity she brought to everything she did. In California, her artistic talents had been recognized and celebrated by teachers who encouraged her detailed pencil drawings and watercolor landscapes. Here in Connecticut, she found herself starting over in an environment where artistic ability seemed less important than the right brand of sneakers or the ability to navigate social media drama with sophisticated ease. Maya's apparent vulnerability came not from weakness but from a cultural background that emphasized humility, respect, and careful consideration before speaking. Her mother had raised her with values that prioritized listening over talking, helping others over self-promotion, and finding strength in quiet determination rather than loud assertion. These qualities, which had served Maya well in her previous school, seemed to mark her as an outsider at Westfield, where confidence was often measured by the volume of one's voice and the willingness to claim attention, regardless of whether one had earned it. What none of her new classmates knew was that Maya had been training in Judo since she was 4 years old under the patient guidance of her grandfather, Hiroshi Chen. Every afternoon after school, while other students were engaged in team sports or social activities, Maya could be found at Riverside Park practicing kata with an elderly man whose weathered hands still moved with the precision of someone who had devoted 70 years to understanding the art of using an opponent's strength against them. Hiroshi had been born in Kyoto and had immigrated to the United States as a young man, bringing with him not just technical knowledge of martial arts, but a philosophy that viewed physical training as inseparable from character development. The daily training sessions in the park had become a sacred ritual for Maya and her grandfather. As the Connecticut autumn painted the maple trees in brilliant reds and oranges, they would find a level patch of grass near the pond, where Hiroshi would guide Maya through exercises that combined physical conditioning with mental discipline. He taught her to read body language with the same attention to detail that she brought to her artwork, to recognize the subtle shifts in posture and breathing that telegraphed an opponent's intentions long before they committed to action. More importantly, he had instilled in her an understanding that true strength came not from the ability to dominate others, but from the self-control to use force only when absolutely necessary to protect oneself or those who could not protect themselves. Hiroshi's teachings extended far beyond the technical aspects of throws, holds, and defensive movements. During their training sessions, he would share stories from his own youth in Japan, where he had learned that respect was earned through consistent action, rather than demanded through intimidation. He spoke of the concept of Ju, the gentle way that gave Judo its name, explaining how the art taught practitioners to yield in order to overcome, to redirect rather than oppose, and to find victory through adaptability rather than rigid resistance. These lessons had shaped not just Maya's physical capabilities, but her entire approach to navigating difficult situations. The discipline required for judo training had developed Maya's ability to remain calm under pressure, to think clearly when others might panic, and to trust in her preparation when facing challenges that seemed overwhelming. She had learned to control her breathing during intense sparring sessions, to maintain her balance when thrown off-center, and to recover quickly from positions that appeared hopeless. These skills had applications that extended far beyond the practice mat, giving her an inner stability that allowed her to observe the social chaos of middle school with detachment, rather than desperation. Maya's artistic abilities and her martial arts training were connected in ways that even she was only beginning to understand. Both required patience, attention to detail, and the ability to see patterns that others might miss. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sketched portraits of her classmates during lunch periods, she found herself noticing not just their facial features but their posture, their gestures, and the subtle ways they position themselves in relation to others. The same observational skills that allowed her to capture the essence of a person in pencil strokes also helped her read the dynamics of power and vulnerability that played out in every classroom and hallway interaction. Her sketchbook had become both a shield and a window into her world. The drawings that filled its pages revealed an artistic maturity that surprised even Mrs. Davis, who had taught hundreds of students over her 15-year career. Maya's portraits captured not just physical likenesses but emotional truths, showing classmates in moments of genuine vulnerability or unexpected kindness that contrasted sharply with the personas they projected in public. Her landscape drawings demonstrated a patience and attention to detail that spoke of hours spent in quiet observation, finding beauty in ordinary scenes that others overlooked. The very qualities that made Maya exceptional also made her invisible to many of her peers. In a social environment that rewarded extroversion and self-promotion, her preference for listening over speaking was interpreted as having nothing to say. Her careful consideration before responding to questions was seen as slowness rather than thoughtfulness. Her genuine interest in others was mistaken for social anxiety, rather than the empathy that allowed her to see past surface presentations to the insecurities and hopes that motivated her classmates' behavior. Maya's mother, Linda, worked long shifts at the hospital, often arriving home exhausted from dealing with medical emergencies and the complex needs of patients facing serious health challenges. She worried about her daughter's adjustment to their new life in Connecticut, recognizing that Maya's quiet nature made it difficult for her to form the kind of quick friendships that might ease the transition. Linda had always admired her daughter's artistic talents and her dedication to judo training, but she also understood that these interests set Maya apart from typical teenage pursuits in ways that could lead to social isolation. The financial pressures that had motivated their move to Connecticut also meant that Maya was acutely aware of her family's modest circumstances compared to many of her Westfield classmates. Her art supplies were carefully chosen and maintained, her clothes were practical rather than fashionable, and her lunch often consisted of homemade items that reflected her mother's cultural background rather than the processed foods that seemed to dominate most students' meals. These differences, while minor in themselves, contributed to her sense of being an outsider in a community where conformity was highly valued. What Maya's classmates saw when they looked at her was a quiet girl who kept to herself, spoke with a slight accent that marked her as different, and seemed more interested in drawing than in participating in the social activities that defined middle school existence. They saw someone who appeared vulnerable, who lacked the protective armor of an established friend group, and who seemed unlikely to retaliate if targeted for the kind of casual cruelty that some students used to establish their place in the social hierarchy. They could not see the years of training that had taught her to remain centered under pressure, the cultural values that prioritized dignity over revenge, or the quiet confidence that came from knowing exactly what she was capable of when circumstances demanded action. The afternoon sun filtered through the tall windows of Mrs. Davis's art classroom as Maya Chen carefully arranged her watercolor palette, each pigment squeezed with the precision that characterized everything she did. While her classmates chatted loudly about weekend plans and social media drama, Maya found herself drawn into the meditative rhythm of preparing for the day's painting assignment. The classroom buzzed with the energy of students who viewed art period as a welcome break from more demanding academic subjects. But for Maya, these 45 minutes represented the closest thing to sanctuary that Westfield Middle School offered. Mrs. Davis had assigned the class to create self-portraits, a project that sent most 8th graders into spirals of self-consciousness and complaints about the difficulty of drawing faces. Maya approached the assignment differently, seeing it not as an exercise in capturing physical appearance, but as an opportunity to explore the distance between how others saw her and who she actually was. As she began mixing colors on her palette, she thought about the challenge of representing inner strength in a way that wouldn't be obvious to casual observers. The other students struggled with basic proportions and shading techniques, but Maya's brush moved with confident strokes that revealed years of disciplined practice. She had been drawing since she could hold a pencil, encouraged by her grandfather who believed that artistic expression and martial arts shared fundamental principles about balance, timing, and the importance of seeing clearly. Hiroshi had often told her that both activities required the practitioner to empty their mind of distractions and connect with something deeper than conscious thought. During lunch periods, while most students gathered in the cafeteria to navigate the complex social negotiations that determine seating arrangements and conversation topics, Maya could usually be found in a quiet corner of the library working on drawings that revealed a sophistication far beyond her years. Her sketchbook contained detailed studies of human movement that demonstrated an understanding of anatomy and physics that impressed even the high school art teachers who occasionally saw her work. She drew dancers captured mid-leap, athletes frozen at the moment of maximum effort, and elderly people whose posture told stories of lives fully lived. What made Maya's artwork truly exceptional was her ability to capture the essence of strength and stillness. Her drawings of her grandfather showed a man whose physical frame might appear diminished by age, but whose presence commanded respect through the quality of his attention and the purposefulness of his movements. She had sketched him hundreds of times during their training sessions, learning to see past the surface appearance to the disciplined mind that controlled every gesture with conscious intention. The training sessions with Hiroshi had become the foundation of Maya's understanding of herself and her place in the world. Every afternoon at 4 o'clock, regardless of weather or competing obligations, she would meet her grandfather at Riverside Park, where he had established their practice area near a grove of oak trees that provided both privacy and connection to the natural world. The elderly man would arrive carrying a worn canvas bag containing the tools of their training, lightweight mats that could be quickly arranged on the grass, wooden weapons used for kata practice, and a thermos of green tea that they would share during rest periods. Hiroshi's teaching methods combined rigorous physical training with philosophical discussions that helped Maya understand the broader context of what she was learning. He had studied Judo under masters who traced their lineage back to Jigoro Kano, the founder of the art, and he carried forward not just techniques but an entire worldview that emphasized personal development through disciplined practice. During their sessions, he would explain how Judo's principle of maximum efficiency with minimum effort could be applied to every aspect of life, from academic study to interpersonal relationships. The physical aspects of Maya's training had developed her body in ways that weren't immediately obvious to casual observers. Beneath her loose-fitting clothes, she possessed the kind of functional strength that came from years of practicing throws that required precise timing and full-body coordination. Her grip strength could surprise anyone who shook her hand with genuine attention, and her balance was so well developed that she could maintain her center even when deliberately pushed or pulled off axis. More importantly, she had learned to fall safely from any position, a skill that had given her a confidence in physical space that most people never developed. The mental discipline required for Judo had shaped Maya's approach to academic challenges and social difficulties with equal effectiveness. She had learned to break complex problems into manageable components, to remain calm when facing seemingly impossible situations, and to trust in her preparation when pressure mounted. These skills served her well in subjects like mathematics and science, where her methodical approach often led her to solutions that eluded classmates who were technically more gifted but less disciplined in their thinking. Maya's cultural background added additional layers to her understanding of strength and appropriate behavior. Her mother had raised her with stories of ancestors who had survived wars, economic disasters, and cultural upheavals through their ability to adapt while maintaining their core values. Linda Chen had immigrated to the United States as a young woman, and she had taught her daughter that true success came not from demanding recognition but from consistently doing excellent work regardless of whether anyone was watching. The combination of judo training and cultural values had given Maya an unusual perspective on the social dynamics that dominated middle school life. She could observe the complex power struggles that played out in hallways and classrooms with the detached interest of an anthropologist studying tribal behavior. She saw how students used aggression, exclusion, and humiliation as tools for establishing their position in hierarchies that would be completely irrelevant within a few years. More importantly, she understood that most of the cruelty she witnessed came from insecurity rather than genuine confidence. Maya's apparent vulnerability was actually a form of strategic invisibility that allowed her to move through social situations without creating unnecessary conflict. She had learned from her grandfather that the strongest person in any group was often the one who had no need to prove their strength, who could afford to appear weak because they possessed resources that others couldn't detect. This philosophy had served her well during her first months at Westfield, allowing her to observe and understand the school's social ecosystem without being forced to declare allegiances or participate in the petty conflicts that consumed so much of her classmates' energy. The art classroom provided Maya with a unique vantage point for studying her peers in moments when their guard was down. While working on their projects, students often revealed aspects of their personality that they kept hidden during more social periods of the school day. She had sketched Chloe Patterson during one art class, capturing not the confident, popular girl that everyone saw but the anxious perfectionist, who checked her appearance obsessively and seemed genuinely frightened by the possibility of making mistakes. The drawing remained hidden in the back pages of Maya's sketchbook, a private observation that she would never share, but that had helped her understand that even the most seemingly powerful people carried their own fears and insecurities. Maya's training had taught her to recognize the difference between genuine threats and theatrical displays of aggression. Most of the conflicts she observed at school fell into the latter category, performed primarily for social positioning rather than arising from any real danger or legitimate grievance. She had learned to read body language with the precision of someone whose safety might depend on accurately assessing an opponent's intentions, and she could see that most of her classmates were far more concerned with appearing tough than with actually being dangerous. The patience that judo had taught her served Maya well in social situations that might have frustrated or intimidated other students. She understood that conflicts often resolve themselves if given enough time, that apparent defeats could become victories if viewed from a longer perspective, and that the most effective responses were often delayed rather than immediate. This understanding allowed her to endure slights and exclusions that might have driven other students to tears or retaliation, confident that her current situation was temporary and that her true character would eventually be recognized by those whose opinions actually mattered. As the art period continued and Maya worked on her self-portrait, she found herself thinking about the challenge of representing complexity in a simple image. How could she show both the quiet observer that her classmates saw and the disciplined martial artist that existed beneath that surface? How could she capture the cultural heritage that shaped her values and the individual training that had given her unusual capabilities? The painting would need to suggest depths that couldn't be fully explored in a single class period, just as she herself contained dimensions that might never be fully visible to her Westfield classmates. Chloe Patterson commanded attention the moment she entered any room at Westfield Middle School, not through dramatic gestures or raised voices, but through the subtle confidence that came from never doubting her place at the center of any social situation. At 14, she possessed the kind of early physical maturity that made 8th-grade boys stumble over their words, and younger girls study her appearance with envious intensity. Her honey blonde hair fell in perfect waves that looked effortless, but required 40 minutes of morning preparation, and her clothing bore the understated luxury of brands that whispered wealth rather than shouting it. The Patterson family name carried significant weight in Brookhaven, where Chloe's father, Michael, had built the largest commercial real estate empire in central Connecticut through a combination of shrewd business instincts and carefully cultivated political connections. His developments had transformed entire neighborhoods, bringing upscale shopping centers and luxury housing complexes that attracted the kind of affluent residents who valued privacy and exclusivity above community integration. The family lived in Heritage Hills, a gated community where property values started at figures that represented lifetime earnings for most Brookhaven residents. Chloe's mother, Victoria Patterson, served on the Westfield School Board and chaired the annual fundraising gala that generated hundreds of thousands of dollars for programs that kept the district competitive with the most prestigious private schools in the region. Victoria had attended boarding school in New Hampshire and maintained the kind of social connections that could open doors for her daughter in ways that mere academic achievement never could. She had taught Chloe from an early age that influence was a currency more valuable than money, and that the ability to shape other people's experiences was the ultimate measure of personal power. The combination of family wealth and social position had provided Chloe with advantages that extended far beyond material possessions. She had attended summer camps in Maine where she learned to sail and play tennis alongside children from similar backgrounds, developing the cultural literacy that allowed her to navigate elite social circles with ease. Her bedroom contained equipment for hobbies that most families couldn't afford to explore: professional quality photography gear, a violin that had been handcrafted in Germany, and art supplies that cost more than many students' entire school wardrobe. Yet beneath the polished surface that Chloe presented to the world lay insecurities that drove her need to control every social situation she encountered. Her parents' marriage existed primarily as a business partnership, with Michael frequently traveling and Victoria consumed by charitable obligations that served more to enhance her social status than to address genuine community needs. Chloe had learned early that her value to her parents was measured by her ability to reflect well on the family name, to be the kind of daughter who could be displayed at country club events and alumni gatherings as evidence of successful parenting. The pressure to maintain perfection had created in Chloe a hypervigilance about her image that extended to obsessive control over her social environment. She could not tolerate unpredictability or situations where her influence might be challenged, and she had developed sophisticated strategies for eliminating threats to her position before they could fully emerge. Her cruelty was not random or impulsive, but carefully calculated to maintain the social order that kept her at its center. Ashley Rodriguez had aligned herself with Chloe during their 7th grade year, recognizing that proximity to power offered protection from the kind of social exile that could make middle school unbearable. Ashley's family had moved to Brookhaven when her father's accounting firm landed a major contract with one of Michael Patterson's development companies, a connection that had smoothed Ashley's integration into the community's social hierarchy. Her parents, both first-generation college graduates, were intensely focused on providing their daughter with opportunities they had never imagined for themselves. Ashley's eagerness to please made her particularly valuable to Chloe's operations, as she could be counted on to execute plans with an enthusiasm that bordered on desperation. Her role in the group required her to maintain constant vigilance about social dynamics, reporting back to Chloe about conversations she overheard, relationships that seemed to be forming, and potential challenges to their collective authority. The responsibility had made Ashley chronically anxious, constantly checking her phone for messages that might require immediate action and studying other students' behavior for signs of disloyalty or rebellion. The third member of their alliance, Madison Wells, brought a different set of skills to their collaborative efforts. Madison's parents were both emergency room physicians at Valley Regional Hospital, and their demanding schedules had left her largely unsupervised since elementary school. She had learned to navigate adult spaces with precocious sophistication, developing the ability to read social situations and manipulate outcomes that served her well in middle school politics. Madison's contribution to the group was her creativity in identifying weaknesses that could be exploited, and her willingness to push boundaries that others might hesitate to cross. Together, the three girls had perfected a system of social control that operated through exclusion, humiliation disguised as humor, and the strategic spreading of information that could damage reputations. They understood that modern schools had policies against obvious bullying, so they specialized in psychological warfare that left no physical evidence and could be explained away as misunderstandings or jokes taken too seriously. Their methods were sophisticated enough to avoid triggering administrative intervention while maintaining their effectiveness in establishing and enforcing social hierarchies. Chloe's approach to target selection revealed the calculating intelligence that made her particularly dangerous. She avoided students with strong family connections or those who might generate sympathy if mistreated. Instead, she focused on individuals who were socially isolated, whose families lacked the resources or knowledge to navigate school politics effectively, and who could be cut off from potential allies through careful manipulation of group dynamics. The quiet new girl who spent lunch periods alone drawing in sketchbooks represented exactly the kind of vulnerability that Chloe had learned to exploit. The art classroom had become a particularly important battleground for Chloe's social engineering, because Mrs. Davis's relaxed teaching style created opportunities for the kind of subtle harassment that could unfold without adult detection. During collaborative projects, Chloe could isolate targeted students by claiming they were unreliable partners. When selecting groups for activities, she could engineer social exclusion that appeared natural rather than deliberate. The creative nature of the assignments also provided cover for criticism that could be presented as artistic feedback rather than personal attack. Maya Chen's exceptional artistic abilities had first attracted Chloe's attention during their second week of school, when Mrs. Davis had displayed several student works as examples of outstanding technique. Maya's watercolor landscape had demonstrated a level of skill that made other students' efforts appear amateurish by comparison, earning praise from their teacher that Chloe found difficult to tolerate. The recognition represented a threat to the natural order that placed Chloe at the center of any positive attention, and it had marked Maya as someone who needed to be reminded of her proper place in the school's social ecosystem. The fact that Maya seemed genuinely unaware of the social dynamics swirling around her made her an even more attractive target for Chloe's attention. Students who actively sought popularity could be managed through inclusion or exclusion, but those who appeared indifferent to social status posed a different kind of challenge. Maya's apparent contentment with solitude suggested a self-sufficiency that Chloe found threatening, as if the new girl possessed resources that made her immune to the approval that Chloe controlled. Chloe had spent weeks studying Maya's patterns and vulnerabilities, noting her preference for working alone, her reluctance to speak in class discussions, and her habit of keeping detailed sketchbooks that she guarded carefully. The notebooks represented potential leverage, as they likely contained personal thoughts and observations that could be embarrassing if shared publicly. More importantly, Maya's obvious attachment to her artwork suggested that threatening or damaging her creative work would generate the kind of emotional response that Chloe needed to establish dominance. The plan that had been developing in Chloe's mind required careful timing and coordination with Ashley and Madison to ensure maximum impact with minimal risk of serious consequences. She needed an audience large enough to establish her power but controlled enough to prevent unwanted witnesses from reporting details that might trigger administrative investigation. The art classroom during the final period of the day provided the perfect setting. When Mrs. Davis was often distracted by cleanup responsibilities and students were focused on completing their assignments rather than monitoring social interactions. Ashley's role would be to create the initial distraction that would draw Mrs. Davis's attention away from the main action, while Madison would position herself to block potential escape routes and ensure that other students understood their expected response to what they were about to witness. Chloe herself would deliver the humiliation that would demonstrate Maya's powerlessness and remind everyone present of the consequences that awaited those who failed to acknowledge her authority. The specific nature of the planned humiliation had been carefully chosen to maximize psychological impact while maintaining plausible deniability about its severity. Forcing Maya to clean the floor would combine physical degradation with symbolic submission, demonstrating that her artistic talents and quiet dignity were irrelevant when confronted with real social power. The act would be performed in front of classmates who would remember the image and associate Maya with weakness and victimization for the remainder of their time at Westfield. What Chloe could not anticipate was that her carefully planned demonstration of power was about to encounter a force that her social calculations had never accounted for. The quiet girl she had identified as the perfect victim possessed resources that were invisible to observers, who measured strength by volume and dominance by display. The afternoon of October 15th began like any other Tuesday at Westfield Middle School, with the familiar rhythm of students transitioning between classes and the low hum of adolescent energy that characterized the final periods of the school day. Maya Chen sat at her usual workstation in Mrs. Davis's art classroom, carefully adding delicate brushstrokes to her self-portrait while the Connecticut sun slanted through tall windows, casting golden rectangles across paint-splattered tables and half-finished canvases. The warmth of the late autumn afternoon had created a drowsy atmosphere that made the creative work feel almost meditative, and Maya found herself completely absorbed in the challenge of capturing something true about herself on paper. Mrs. Davis had stepped out of the classroom to retrieve supplies from the storage room down the hall, leaving her students with instructions to continue working on their projects and promising to return within 10 minutes. The temporary absence of adult supervision created the kind of opportunity that Chloe Patterson had been waiting for, a window of time when she could execute the plan that had been forming in her mind for weeks. The careful observation and strategic thinking that had made her the most influential student at Westfield were about to be directed toward demonstrating her power over the quiet new girl who had somehow managed to exist on the periphery of social dynamics without acknowledging Chloe's authority. Maya remained focused on her painting, unaware that she had become the center of attention for three girls whose approach represented a carefully choreographed performance designed to maximize humiliation while minimizing the risk of serious consequences. Chloe moved with the confidence of someone who had never encountered genuine resistance to her will, while Ashley and Madison positioned themselves according to a plan they had rehearsed mentally during lunch period. The other students in the classroom sensed that something significant was about to happen, their conversations gradually dying away as they recognized the purposeful quality of Chloe's movements. The first indication that Maya's peaceful afternoon was about to be shattered came when Ashley Rodriguez deliberately knocked over a jar of water that had been sitting near Maya's workstation, sending dirty liquid cascading across the table and onto the floor near where Maya was sitting. The apparent accident created exactly the kind of chaos that Chloe needed to begin her demonstration, as Maya instinctively moved to protect her painting from the spreading water, while Ashley offered loud apologies that drew attention to the situation. Madison Wells took advantage of the distraction to position herself near the classroom door, effectively blocking the most obvious escape route while maintaining the appearance of simply cleaning up the spilled water. Her role required her to monitor the hallway for Mrs. Davis's return, while ensuring that other students understood they were expected to witness what was about to unfold rather than intervene or seek help. The coordination between the three girls revealed a level of sophisticated planning that made clear this was not a spontaneous act of teenage cruelty, but a carefully orchestrated demonstration of power. Chloe approached Maya's workstation with the measured pace of a predator who knew her prey had nowhere to run, her expression combining false concern with barely concealed satisfaction. She surveyed the damage caused by the spilled water, making sympathetic noises about the ruined artwork, while simultaneously maneuvering Maya away from her seat and toward a corner of the classroom where the confrontation could unfold with maximum visibility to their classmates. The performance was designed to appear helpful at first, creating plausible deniability about Chloe's true intentions while establishing her physical dominance over the smaller girl. Maya felt the familiar tightening in her chest that accompanied moments of genuine danger, her grandfather's training automatically activating systems that began assessing threats and calculating potential responses. Years of judo practice had taught her to recognize when someone was moving with predatory intent, and every instinct developed through countless hours of sparring was now alerting her that she was facing a situation that might require her to defend herself. Yet her cultural background and personal values made her hesitant to escalate a confrontation, particularly in a setting where she would be blamed for any violence that occurred. The dirty water from Ashley's deliberately overturned jar had created a muddy puddle on the classroom floor, mixing tempera paint with dust and debris to form the kind of grimy mess that would normally be cleaned up by custodial staff after school hours. Chloe looked down at the spreading stain with theatrical disgust, then turned to Maya with an expression of exaggerated sympathy that fooled no one who was paying attention to the undercurrents of the situation. The stage was now set for the humiliation that would demonstrate to everyone present exactly what happened to students who failed to acknowledge the social hierarchy that Chloe controlled. Ashley and Madison had positioned themselves to create a human barrier that prevented other students from easily intervening, while maintaining their own ability to claim they were simply trying to help clean up the mess. Their body language conveyed to their classmates that this was a situation where witnesses were expected, but participation was discouraged, effectively creating an audience for the performance that Chloe was about to deliver. The psychological dynamics at work were sophisticated enough to manipulate even students who might normally have spoken up against obvious cruelty. Chloe's voice carried clearly across the suddenly quiet classroom as she addressed Maya with the kind of false concern that made her words more threatening than any direct insult could have been. She gestured toward the muddy puddle spreading across the floor and suggested that Maya should take responsibility for cleaning up the mess, since her careless handling of art supplies had contributed to the accident. The accusation was transparently false, but it served to establish a narrative that would justify whatever came next, while placing the blame squarely on the victim. Maya's training had taught her to remain calm under pressure, but she could feel her heart rate accelerating as she recognized the trap that was being constructed around her. Her grandfather had taught her to distinguish between situations that required physical response and those that could be resolved through other means. But the predatory quality of Chloe's approach was making it increasingly clear that diplomatic solutions were not going to be effective. The other students in the classroom were watching with the kind of fascinated horror that characterized audiences for cruelty, their silence serving as tacit approval for whatever was about to unfold. The moment when the situation crossed the line from psychological intimidation to physical degradation came when Chloe grabbed Maya's wrist and began pulling her toward the muddy puddle on the floor, her grip firm enough to prevent easy escape while maintaining the appearance of helpful guidance. Ashley and Madison moved closer to ensure that Maya had no avenue for retreat, their positions creating a triangle of containment that made resistance appear futile. The coordination of their movements revealed hours of planning, and demonstrated that this was not a spontaneous act of teenage aggression, but a calculated assault designed to break Maya's spirit in front of witnesses. Maya felt the familiar sensation of time slowing down that occurred during moments of extreme stress, her perception sharpening as adrenaline flooded her system and her body prepared for action. Years of training had conditioned her to recognize the difference between theatrical aggression and genuine violence, and Chloe's grip on her wrist crossed the threshold that transformed this from a social confrontation into a physical assault. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her mind, reminding her that the strongest response was often the one that ended conflict most quickly and decisively. Chloe's voice took on a commanding tone as she forced Maya to her knees beside the muddy puddle, her words carrying across the classroom with crystal clarity as she announced that the new girl needed to learn some humility about her place in the Westfield social order. The public nature of the humiliation was essential to its purpose, as it would establish Maya's powerlessness in the memories of everyone who witnessed it, and serve as a warning to other students about the consequences of failing to show proper respect to those who controlled the school's social hierarchy. The floor of the art classroom had not been properly cleaned since the beginning of the school year, and the accumulated grime of dozens of painting sessions had created a surface that was genuinely revolting to contemplate touching with bare skin. Muddy footprints, dried paint splatters, and various unidentifiable stains had combined to form a patina of filth that would have disgusted even the custodial staff who were paid to deal with such messes. The thought of forcing another human being to make oral contact with such a surface revealed a level of cruelty that went far beyond typical teenage bullying. Maya's position on her knees beside the filthy puddle created the perfect tableau for Chloe's demonstration of dominance, with the smaller girl appearing helpless and defeated while her tormentors stood over her with obvious satisfaction. Ashley and Madison maintained their positions as guards and witnesses, their presence ensuring that the humiliation would be complete and witnessed by a sufficient number of classmates to establish its social significance. The moment stretched with the terrible anticipation that preceded genuine violence, as everyone present understood that they were about to witness something that would change the dynamics of their classroom forever. Chloe's command came with the cold precision of someone who had never doubted her right to control others, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade as she ordered Maya to lean down and lick the dirty floor clean as punishment for her carelessness and lack of respect. The demand crossed every boundary of human dignity and revealed the depth of psychological sickness that had been growing beneath Chloe's polished exterior, fed by years of unchecked privilege and the belief that other people existed primarily to serve her needs and validate her sense of superiority. The classroom fell completely silent as students processed what they had just heard, their adolescent minds struggling to comprehend that one of their peers had just demanded something so degrading that most adults would have difficulty imagining it. Several students shifted uncomfortably in their seats, recognizing that they were witnessing something that went far beyond typical school conflicts and entered territory that would haunt their memories for years to come. Yet none of them moved to intervene, paralyzed by the social dynamics that made challenging Chloe's authority seem more frightening than watching Maya be humiliated. Maya felt something fundamental shift inside her as Chloe's words registered fully, her grandfather's teachings crystallizing into perfect clarity about the nature of the choice she now faced. She could submit to this degradation and carry the shame of it for the rest of her time at Westfield, allowing Chloe to establish complete dominance over her and anyone else who might consider challenging the established order. Or she could respond with the kind of decisive action that would end the threat permanently, while demonstrating to everyone present that true strength came from protecting one's dignity rather than surrendering it to avoid conflict. The decision came without conscious deliberation, her body moving with the fluid precision that years of training had made instinctive as she rose from her kneeling position with the controlled power of a coiled spring being released. Chloe had positioned herself directly over Maya to maximize the psychological impact of her dominance, but that same position made her completely vulnerable to the kind of technique that Maya had practiced thousands of times under her grandfather's patient guidance. The principles of Judo were about to be demonstrated with a clarity that would leave no doubt about their effectiveness. Maya's movement began with a subtle shift in her center of gravity that Chloe's untrained eyes could not detect, her left hand reaching up to grip the front of Chloe's expensive sweater, while her right hand secured a hold on the other girl's arm just above the elbow. The grips were established with the kind of precision that came from muscle memory developed through years of repetitive practice, each finger placement calculated to provide maximum leverage for the technique she was about to execute. Chloe felt the sudden contact but had no understanding of what it signified or how helpless it had already made her. The throw that followed unfolded with the inexorable force of physics being applied by someone who understood exactly how to use an opponent's weight and momentum against them. Maya's right foot swept behind Chloe's legs while she simultaneously pulled with her hands and drove forward with her hips, creating a combination of forces that sent the larger girl flying through the air with a trajectory that appeared to defy gravity. The technique was executed with such perfect timing and leverage that Chloe seemed to launch herself, her own forward momentum being redirected upward and backward by Maya's expert manipulation of the fundamental principles of motion. Chloe's scream began the moment she realized that her feet were no longer in contact with the ground, her voice rising to a pitch that expressed both terror and complete disbelief at what was happening to her. The sound echoed off the walls of the art classroom with the kind of raw intensity that immediately communicated genuine fear rather than theatrical dramatics, alerting everyone present that they were witnessing something far more serious than a typical teenage confrontation. Her body rotated through the air in a graceful arc that would have been beautiful if not for the circumstances that had created it. The impact when Chloe hit the floor came with a solid thud that sent vibrations through the wooden boards and caused every student in the classroom to wince in sympathetic response. Maya had controlled the throw with enough precision to ensure that her opponent would land safely rather than suffering serious injury, her grandfather's teachings about responsibility and restraint governing even this moment of justified retaliation. Yet the force of the impact was sufficient to drive the air from Chloe's lungs and leave her gasping on the floor. Her carefully maintained composure shattered, along with her assumptions about her own invulnerability. Ashley Rodriguez's scream joined Chloe's in a harmony of terror that seemed to shake the very foundations of the classroom, her voice cracking with the strain of producing sounds that her throat had never been designed to make. The sight of her leader being thrown through the air like a discarded doll had triggered something primal in Ashley's nervous system, her carefully constructed identity as one of Westfield's most powerful students crumbling in real time, as she confronted evidence that all her assumptions about strength and vulnerability had been completely wrong. Madison Wells stumbled backward against the classroom door, her round face drained of color as she watched Chloe writhing on the floor and struggling to regain her breath. The girl who had prided herself on her sophistication and worldliness found herself reduced to making incoherent noises of distress, her mind unable to process the complete reversal of everything she thought she understood about power dynamics and social control. The confidence that had made her willing to participate in cruelty evaporated completely as she realized that she had helped create a situation that was now completely beyond her ability to control or understand. The other students in the classroom reacted with a mixture of shock, fear, and amazed admiration as they processed what they had just witnessed. Several of them had never seen real violence before, and the clinical precision with which Maya had executed her throw made it clear that this was not lucky accident, but the application of genuine skill by someone who possessed capabilities that none of them had suspected. The quiet girl who had seemed so vulnerable just moments earlier now stood over her fallen tormentor with the calm confidence of someone who had complete control over the situation. Maya herself felt the familiar rush of clarity that came after executing a successful technique, her breathing steady and controlled despite the adrenaline that was flooding her system. Years of training had prepared her for this moment not just physically but mentally, teaching her to remain centered and focused even in the aftermath of violence. She looked down at Chloe with neither satisfaction nor regret, her expression reflecting the kind of emotional equilibrium that came from knowing she had responded appropriately to a genuine threat. Chloe's attempts to regain her footing were complicated by the shock of discovering that her body was not responding normally to her commands, the impact having temporarily disrupted her coordination and left her feeling disconnected from her own physical capabilities. The girl who had never experienced real physical vulnerability found herself unable to stand without assistance, her legs trembling with a combination of fear and physiological stress that made her feel completely helpless. The taste of humiliation was bitter in her mouth as she realized that her carefully planned demonstration of power had backfired spectacularly. The sound of approaching footsteps in the hallway announced Mrs. Davis's return from her supply-gathering mission, her voice carrying ahead of her as she called out instructions about cleaning up workstations before the end of class. The teacher's imminent arrival created a new dynamic in the classroom as students realized they were about to be forced to explain what had happened, while Maya stood calmly beside Chloe's prone form like a statue of quiet determination. The contrast between the chaos that had just erupted and Maya's serene composure made it clear to everyone present that they had seriously underestimated the new girl's capabilities. Mrs. Davis's entrance into the classroom was marked by a moment of complete silence as she took in the scene before her. Chloe Patterson lying on the floor gasping for breath, Ashley Rodriguez backed against a wall with tears streaming down her face, Madison Wells cowering by the door, and Maya Chen standing with perfect posture in the center of it all. The teacher's 15 years of experience had prepared her for many challenging situations, but the tableau she encountered suggested something far more serious than typical teenage drama. The explanation that followed came in fragments as various students attempted to describe what they had witnessed, their accounts revealing the careful planning that had preceded Chloe's humiliation attempt and the devastating effectiveness of Maya's response. Mrs. Davis listened with growing amazement as she realized that the quiet girl she had observed working diligently on her art projects possessed skills that had completely neutralized what appeared to have been a serious assault. The teacher's training in recognizing signs of bullying helped her understand that Maya's action had been defensive rather than aggressive. Principal Johnson's arrival in the classroom 15 minutes later brought with it the weight of administrative authority and the recognition that the incident would require careful investigation and appropriate consequences. The veteran educator had dealt with countless disciplinary situations during his career, but the description of what had occurred in Mrs. Davis's art room represented something unique in his experience. The combination of premeditated bullying and skilled physical defense created a complex situation that would require wisdom and careful judgment to resolve appropriately. The interviews that followed took place in Principal Johnson's office, with each participant providing their perspective on the events that had led to Chloe being thrown across the art classroom. Maya's account was delivered with the same calm precision that had characterized her throw, her voice steady and her facts clear as she described the escalating harassment and the moment when she had been forced to defend herself. Her explanation revealed not just what had happened but why it had been necessary, demonstrating a level of self-awareness and moral reasoning that impressed even the skeptical administrator. Chloe's version of events, delivered between sobs and protestations of innocence, painted a picture of herself as the victim of an unprovoked attack by a violent new student who had hidden her dangerous tendencies behind a facade of artistic sensitivity. Her parents' arrival at the school within an hour of the incident brought with it the kind of legal and political pressure that Principal Johnson had learned to navigate carefully, as the Patterson family's influence in the community made any disciplinary decisions involving their daughter particularly delicate. The security camera footage from the hallway outside the art classroom provided crucial evidence that corroborated Maya's account of the events, showing Chloe, Ashley, and Madison entering the room together and remaining positioned near the door in a pattern that suggested coordination rather than coincidence. While the cameras had not captured the actual confrontation inside the classroom, the behavior of the three girls before and after the incident supported Maya's description of a planned attack rather than a spontaneous conflict. Maya's mother Linda arrived at the school still wearing her hospital scrubs, her shift in the emergency room having been interrupted by a phone call that initially filled her with terror about her daughter's safety. The relief she felt upon learning that Maya had not been injured was quickly replaced by pride as she understood the courage and skill her daughter had displayed in defending herself. The conversation with Principal Johnson revealed not just what had happened, but how well Maya's training had prepared her for exactly this kind of situation. The involvement of Hiroshi Chen in the subsequent discussions brought a perspective that helped the adults understand the context for Maya's capabilities and the values that had governed her response to Chloe's attack. The elderly man's calm explanation of judo principles and his granddaughter's training helped Principal Johnson recognize that Maya's action had been precisely calibrated to end the threat with minimal harm to her attacker. The restraint she had shown in the midst of defending herself demonstrated a level of moral development that was remarkable in someone her age. The medical examination that Chloe underwent at her parents' insistence revealed no serious injuries from her encounter with the art classroom floor, though the psychological impact of discovering her own vulnerability would prove far more lasting than any physical damage. The realization that her carefully constructed image of invincibility had been shattered in front of witnesses created a crisis of identity that would force her to confront uncomfortable truths about herself and her behavior toward others. Ashley Rodriguez spent the remainder of the school day in the nurse's office, her nervous system overwhelmed by the shock of witnessing violence that had exceeded anything in her previous experience. The girl who had prided herself on her sophistication found herself reduced to a trembling, tearful state that revealed how much of her confidence had been dependent on her association with Chloe's seemingly unshakable power. The collapse of that foundation left her questioning everything she thought she knew about strength, popularity, and social success. Madison Wells retreated into a shell of silence that persisted for days after the incident, her usual chattiness replaced by a withdrawn demeanor that suggested she was processing something too large for her previous worldview to accommodate. The creativity that had made her valuable to Chloe's operations was now directed inward, as she struggled to understand how badly she had misjudged the situation, and what it meant about her ability to navigate social relationships safely. The response from the broader Westfield Middle School community revealed the extent to which Chloe's behavior had been tolerated, rather than truly accepted, as students who had been afraid to speak up began sharing their own experiences of harassment and intimidation. The incident in the art classroom had created a crack in the facade of normalcy that allowed long-suppressed stories to emerge, painting a picture of systematic bullying that had been invisible to most adults but devastatingly real for its victims. Tyler Brooks, a quiet 8th grader who had been one of Chloe's earlier targets, found the courage to approach Maya during lunch period 2 days after the incident, his voice barely above a whisper as he thanked her for doing what he had never been brave enough to attempt. The conversation that followed revealed that Maya's action had given hope to students who had begun to believe that the social hierarchy at Westfield was immutable and that suffering in silence was their only option. Sam Martinez, a 7th grader whose small stature had made him an attractive target for Ashley's need to prove her toughness, discovered that the protection he had thought impossible was now available simply because someone had demonstrated that the bullies were not actually untouchable. His gratitude toward Maya was complicated by his own shame at having endured harassment without fighting back, but her gentle response helped him understand that courage came in many forms, and that survival was often its own form of bravery. The peer mediation sessions that began the following week brought together students who had been affected by the incident in various ways, creating opportunities for honest conversations about power, respect, and the responsibility that came with strength. Maya's participation in these discussions revealed not just her physical capabilities, but her emotional intelligence and commitment to using her influence constructively rather than destructively. Her insights about conflict resolution reflected lessons learned not just from judo training, but from years of observing human behavior, with the careful attention of someone who understood that knowledge could be the most effective form of self-defense. The transformation that began in Chloe Patterson was perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the entire situation, as the girl who had built her identity around controlling others was forced to confront the hollowness of that foundation. The therapy sessions that her parents arranged initially focused on helping her process the trauma of being physically overpowered, but gradually evolved into deeper exploration of the insecurities and need for control that had driven her bullying behavior. The work was difficult and often painful, requiring her to acknowledge harm she had caused and to develop empathy for experiences she had never bothered to consider. Ashley Rodriguez's recovery took a different path, as her nervous temperament made it difficult for her to process the sudden collapse of the social structure that had given her life meaning and direction. The counseling sessions revealed that much of her aggression had been motivated by fear of becoming a victim herself, and that her alliance with Chloe had been a form of protection rather than genuine friendship. Learning to build relationships based on mutual respect rather than shared enemies required her to develop social skills that she had never needed while operating under Chloe's protection. Madison Wells channeled her analytical nature into understanding what had gone wrong in her assessment of Maya as a safe target, her fascination with the miscalculation gradually evolving into genuine respect for the quiet girl's capabilities and character. The realization that she had been completely wrong about someone she had studied carefully forced her to question other assumptions and to approach relationships with more humility and genuine curiosity about other people's experiences. Mrs. Davis used the incident as a catalyst for broader discussions about respect, empathy, and the creative potential that emerged when students felt safe to express themselves authentically. Her art classroom became a laboratory for exploring how conflicts could be resolved through understanding rather than domination, with Maya's example serving as proof that strength and gentleness were not contradictory qualities but could be combined in ways that protected rather than harmed. Principal Johnson's handling of the disciplinary consequences reflected his recognition that the incident had created an opportunity for education rather than simply punishment. While Chloe, Ashley, and Madison faced appropriate sanctions for their behavior, the focus remained on helping them understand the impact of their actions and develop better strategies for handling conflicts in the future. Maya's response was recognized as appropriate self-defense, but she also participated in discussions about the responsibility that came with her abilities. The involvement of Hiroshi Chen in the school's conflict resolution programs brought a perspective that helped educators understand how physical training could be combined with character development to create students who were both capable and compassionate. His willingness to share his knowledge about martial arts philosophy provided a framework for helping other students understand that true strength was always in service of protection rather than domination. Linda Chen's pride in her daughter was complicated by concern about the attention that Maya's actions had attracted, but conversations with school officials and other parents helped her understand that her daughter had become a positive role model, rather than a source of fear. The recognition that Maya's training had prepared her not just to defend herself but to do so in a way that minimized harm to her attacker validated years of investment in her character development. The ripple effects of the incident extended far beyond the immediate participants, as news of what had happened spread through the community and prompted broader conversations about bullying, self-defense, and the responsibility of bystanders to intervene when they witnessed cruelty. Parents who had been unaware of the social dynamics affecting their children began asking more pointed questions about their school experiences and taking more active roles in addressing problems they had previously overlooked. The martial arts program that Hiroshi Chen established at the Brookhaven Community Center, in response to increased interest following the incident, emphasized the philosophical aspects of training alongside physical techniques, ensuring that students understood the ethical framework that should govern the use of their abilities. Maya served as an assistant instructor for younger students, her patient teaching style and obvious competence helping to break down stereotypes about who could be strong and how strength should be expressed. The transformation of the art classroom from a site of attempted humiliation to a symbol of resilience and dignity reflected the broader changes that rippled through Westfield Middle School in the months following the incident. Students began to approach their creative work with more confidence, understanding that they were operating in an environment where their efforts would be protected rather than mocked. The quality of artwork produced in Mrs. Davis's classes improved noticeably as students felt safer taking risks and expressing authentic emotions through their creations. Maya's integration into the school's social fabric accelerated dramatically after the incident, as classmates who had previously been too intimidated to approach her discovered that her quiet demeanor concealed not weakness but remarkable depth and wisdom. The friendships that developed were built on genuine, mutual respect rather than social calculation, creating a network of relationships that enriched her experience and provided support for the challenges that came with her newfound visibility. The academic achievement that followed Maya's social integration reflected her increased comfort with participating in class discussions and collaborative projects, her insights contributing to learning environments that benefited all students. Teachers who had previously seen her as a shy student requiring extra encouragement discovered that she possessed analytical abilities and creative perspectives that enhanced their curricula when given appropriate opportunities to share them. Jordan Kim, the student council president who had initially been intimidated by Chloe's social power, found the courage to propose initiatives aimed at creating more inclusive school culture after witnessing Maya's example of standing up for herself. The programs that emerged from these efforts reflected a student-driven commitment to ensuring that Westfield became a place where all students could thrive, regardless of their background or social status. Emma Foster, who had been afraid to pursue her interest in martial arts because it seemed incompatible with traditional feminine roles, was inspired by Maya's example to begin training at Hiroshi's community center program. The friendship that developed between the two girls demonstrated how shared values and mutual respect could transcend surface differences in personality and background, creating bonds that enriched both of their lives. The long-term impact of Maya's action extended far beyond the immediate resolution of her conflict with Chloe, as the demonstration of effective self-defense encouraged other students to develop their own capabilities and confidence. The culture of fear that had allowed bullying to flourish began to erode, as potential victims understood that they had options beyond simply enduring harassment or hoping for adult intervention that might never come. The training programs that emerged from community interest in Maya's story emphasized not just physical techniques, but the mental discipline and moral framework necessary to use those techniques responsibly. Students learned to recognize the difference between appropriate self-defense and aggressive retaliation, developing judgment skills that would serve them well in situations far beyond school conflicts. Chloe's eventual return to full participation in school activities came after months of therapy and community service designed to help her understand the impact of her behavior and develop empathy for those she had harmed. Her apology to Maya was delivered privately and accepted graciously, marking the beginning of a relationship that would never be close but was characterized by mutual respect rather than hostility. The mentorship role that Maya gradually assumed with younger students reflected her growing understanding that her capabilities came with responsibilities to help others develop their own strength and confidence. Her patient teaching style and genuine concern for each student's individual progress made her an effective role model who demonstrated that leadership could be expressed through service rather than domination. The artistic recognition that Maya received for her work throughout 8th grade reflected not just her technical abilities, but the emotional depth that came from her experiences of conflict and resolution. Her self-portrait, completed months after the incident in the art classroom, captured something essential about the integration of strength and gentleness that had made her response so effective and inspiring. The family dynamics that strengthened between Maya, her mother, and her grandfather reflected their shared understanding that the values they had worked to instill had been tested under pressure and proven their worth. The pride they felt was not in violence, but in Maya's ability to protect herself, while maintaining her moral center and treating even her attacker with appropriate restraint. The community recognition that came to Hiroshi-chan for his role in developing Maya's character brought validation to traditional approaches to character education that emphasized patience, discipline, and the integration of physical and moral development. His willingness to share his knowledge with broader audiences helped ensure that his philosophy would influence future generations of students. The prevention programs that emerged from analysis of the incident focused on early identification of bullying behavior and intervention strategies that addressed underlying causes rather than simply punishing symptoms. Maya's example provided a framework for understanding how students could be empowered to protect themselves while maintaining the values that made education environments positive for everyone. Years later, as Maya prepared to graduate from high school as valedictorian and recipient of a full scholarship to study education and psychology, she reflected on how a single moment of choosing courage over submission had shaped not just her own trajectory, but the entire culture of her school and community. The quiet girl who had once sat alone in the art classroom had become someone whose influence would extend far beyond her own immediate experiences. The legacy of that October afternoon, when Maya Chen rose from her knees and demonstrated that dignity was worth defending, would continue to inspire students who faced their own moments of choice between submission and courage. The scream that had echoed through the art classroom when Chloe hit the floor had marked not just the end of one girl's reign of terror, but the beginning of a new understanding about strength, respect, and the power of individual action to transform entire communities. The lesson that emerged from the incident was not that violence was the answer to bullying, but but that the willingness to defend one's dignity with appropriate force could prevent greater harm and create space for healing and growth. Maya's careful restraint in the midst of justified anger had demonstrated that true strength lay not in the ability to cause harm, but in the wisdom to know when and how to use force in service of protection rather than revenge. The transformation of Westfield Middle School, from a place where fear governed social interactions to an environment where respect and mutual support flourished, stood as testament to the power of individual courage to catalyze broader change. Maya's story became part of the school's oral tradition, passed down to new students as an example of how ordinary people could respond to extraordinary circumstances with wisdom, skill, and compassion. The ripple effects of that single act of self-defense would continue to spread for years to come, touching lives and changing perspectives in ways that Maya could never have anticipated when she first rose from her position beside that dirty puddle. Her grandfather's teachings about the responsibility that came with strength had been validated not just by her technical execution of a perfect throw, but by her lifetime commitment to using her influence in service of creating safer, more inclusive communities where all students could thrive. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.